What's going on, people? Welcome to episode 2 of Kit Krazy. Today we are talking Smaug, the Games Workshop Forge World Dragon model from the movie The Hobbit. This model is a beast. It's huge, tons of parts, but not too many little parts. Because this is a large model and it's a resin model, it does require some filling. I posted on a Facebook post a while back, really the process of putting it together and doing the green stuff and sculpting to fill in the seams. I prime most of my models in white. I just find that it's an easier process for me to paint over white as opposed to black. For Smaug, I went with the Armor Painter color primer, the matte white primer. For airbrushes, I ended up using two. You'll see why. Both of them Aztecs, the A470 and the A480, which is a metal version of the A470. Paint choice for this project are the Citadel airbrush paints, Mephiston Red and Troll Slayer Orange as the two main colors. What I'm doing is I'm base priming the model, so it really is just to cover as much of the model as I can. These paints are fairly good and consistent throughout. As far as airbrush thinners, really anything out there in the market is good. But for years I've been making my own thinner with 33% alcohol to 67% distilled water. Distilled water is better than regular water because it doesn't have the gunk and the dirt that regular water may have. So it's just better to make your thinner out of something that's much purer, especially since you're going to be putting it through probably your favorite airbrush. By the way, the 80s, best music ever. As you do more airbrushing, you start collecting stuff that you'll need over time. A syringe, some latex gloves, an air booth for the airbrush. You should always keep some kind of white drawing pad. It's a good way to mix your paints and test the airbrush as you're painting. Sometimes it's well, not sometimes, always it's best to try whatever color you're using for consistency or thickness on a pad. The syringe is my favorite way to mix paints. I don't really sort of get too fuzzy, especially with these Citadel paints. They're pretty good when it comes to mixing them. I don't necessarily pre-mix in a bottle. I do have a little clear bottle that you'll see I'm using later. But that's just once I get a good mix that feels good in the airbrush, I will store it, the extra paint in that clear bottle. The white pad is really very good, as you can see here, because it just helps you get the consistency of the paint before you get to the model, which is always a better thing to do than to try it on the model. Whenever you're airbrushing, you want to start the brush outside of the model, not on the model itself, just in case there's some issue with the paint consistency. You don't want it spinning on the model. If it does, it's not a big disaster. It's not a big problem because you can't fix it. But you want to just, as much as possible, start away from the model, move the brush into the model, and just gently move it around, and always sort of stay that first stroke with the airbrush. Try to start it away from the actual surface of the model. Depending on how much you're painting and how big the model, it really does help sometimes to take a quick break and run some thinner, clean out the brush, clean out the cup. If you have a long painting session, sometimes it will clog your airbrush. I actually just do it the old-fashioned way. I stick the freaking thinner right into the brush and squirt it out until the brush is totally clean. So here's the body, mostly done. Moving on to the wings. The wings are, again, fairly sizable. I was actually struggling with painting this in my small airbrush booth. But because it is a big model, and because of all the spiky things on the wings, it's hard to move it within the confines of the booth. I'm using the Troll Slayer Orange on the underside and on the thinner parts of the wings. What I will do is use the Troll Slayer into the thinner sort of fold lines of the wings, and then I'll go back with a lighter mix and hit the very center of the wing folds, in essence where the sun might shine through. So here are the wings, the bottom of the body, primed with the Troll Slayer orange. I'm using the Mephiston red for the upper body and the rest of the wings, the infrastructure around the wings and around the thinner panels of the wings. Again, I mix my brushes, my colors right in the cup, and then I try them on the pad. I move straight to the body, and again, I remember that you don't have to be perfect with an airbrush when it comes to this size model, because you're going to be touching things up later on that you can't get to with the airbrush, especially like in between the legs and the tail. So you want to just get the best even coverage, the best blend that you can between the lighter color and the darker color, and just make sure you cover as much of the model as you possibly can. Again, this takes a little practice, especially in a model like this. I wouldn't recommend that you start your airbrush career on this giant beast, especially with those spikes. They did a good job of puncturing lots of holes on my gloves, which meant I had to change it a lot. But here's good progress on the body, and a good solid blend all around. Once I do this, I will go back and touch up the wings. And here's what I was talking about before. I throw a little lighter color in the wings, and then I go around and I do the red frame around the sort of stronger parts of the wings, sort of like the infrastructure that holds the membranes. So remember that I told you I used 2 airbrushes for this project? Well, my 20-year-old airbrush died. It just wouldn't work. Wasn't sure what the deal is. I'm not sure if it's the tip or the body itself. But in comes the new Aztec, which did a splendid job, finished the wings, and just really saw me through this. That other airbrush had gotten a lot of use over 20 years. I love the Aztecs. They're really, really simple to use. They're just as good as any of the fancy Pachets. They're much easier to clean. You have less control with the tips because they're replaceable. They're not like a regular needle-powered airbrush. So there he is, Smaug, all base coated and ready for finishing. Here's the extra paint that I was mentioning before. I hide it in that little bottle. Catch you guys in episode 3 next week.